Hello, this is Matt on the Moon Lambo channel. I hold a rather controversial perspective, which is that XRP does not have intrinsic value. And I think that I'm in the minority here. I'll admit that right off the bat. I'm pretty darn sure that I'm in the minority with this perspective. Here you can see a few days ago I put out a poll on X, formerly known as Twitter, and I asked, does XRP have intrinsic value? 76.7% of respondents responded with yes. Only 23.3% responded with no. So I've got quite the uphill battle if I'm going to try and persuade you guys that I'm right and you're wrong, right? And so here's the situation. I just want to be clear about this out the bat. I want to believe whatever's true, right? And so I remember it may have been a year or so ago. I brought up, probably in a few videos, there have been times anyway over the years that maybe, but I brought up this idea that, look, I don't really care too much if cryptocurrencies in general have intrinsic value. What matters is, do they offer actual value? And on that front, I'll say, as it pertains to XRP, unquestionably, I think all of us are going to agree here in the XRP community, XRP does have value, but there's a difference between value and intrinsic value, and I want to try and clear this up once and for all. But I had said in the past multiple times, look, I don't as much care about whether or not there's intrinsic value. Is it valuable? Because then we're really getting to the nitty gritty. That's what matters. Are people using it? Is it solving real problems for real people? But this topic came up thanks to, I'll show you in just a second, it has something to do with Ripple arguing basically that there's inherent value in XRP. That's the way they worded it. And so finally, just several days or so ago, I started just thinking about it further in a way more in depth than I ever had. And I found out that it's actually way more interesting and way more complex a topic than I gave it credit for, and probably pretty much anybody would have given it credit for, unless you actually start thoroughly thinking through it and going through a logical process to get to a conclusion. Things like thoughts branch out in so many different ways, and there's such a misunderstanding of even what basic words mean, which we are all using. Words like value and intrinsic and subjectively and objectively. So I just went into this and I was sort of taking basically the Socratic approach, because I already did my suspicion, like based on where I was, and I admitted it like in videos past, like I don't have a firm opinion on this, I could be persuaded. And so I went in thinking, yeah, I don't think that XRP has intrinsic value, but let's take the Socratic approach, and if that's what I think is most likely at this point, let me go ahead and try and defend my own positions. That's what that approach is. But also with me just wanting to be honest with myself internally, as I spent hours and hours thinking through this over the last several days, as I did while I was driving and walking through the park and with my dog and going on jogs and stuff. I did go through that, but I also did my best to poke holes in my arguments that were to on the side of XRP not having intrinsic value. I poked as many holes as I could, and I kept coming back to the conclusion that XRP does not have intrinsic value, because no cryptocurrency has intrinsic value, and actually nothing has intrinsic value. And so I see people talking about intrinsic value for crypto. I have for 6 years, and finally for the first time I dug into this, and really in depth here. And so at this point, I've thought through it enough where I feel fairly confident to state that I think there's a very high probability I'm right on this. Now, I admit there's a possibility you may find a hole in my logic. If you can find a hole in my logic, just tactfully articulate that to me, and I will talk about it in a future video and show what I missed. Because I have no issue with admitting when I'm wrong, because what I'm doing here is operating in good faith. I just want to move the football down the field, so to speak. As a community, I think this is what we should do. I'm sharing with you my thoughts, which I've spent hours on, which are in depth. These are my own original thoughts I'm going to share with you. And then if I'm missing something or you have something to add, then add to the pile. And then we can collectively as a community get closer to truth. So if you can destroy my argument, just do so tactfully, and then that's fine. I don't get offended by people telling me I'm wrong, and just tactfully tell me why. And that's great. But I really feel at this point pretty strongly that I nailed this one. But again, if not, I won't be ashamed to admit I'm wrong, because again, I'm just trying to get to the truth, and humans do that in an imperfect way, and I'm a human, so that's just what it is. So here's the article. Excuse me, folks. Here's the article from the Crypto Basic. They're covering a topic. It's been discussed in recent days. Ripple bursts SEC's claim of XRP has no intrinsic value in court filing. And I don't want to read the article. It's not necessary for this. Just know that this is what, in case you're wondering what kind of got this going. Ripple, in the recent legal brief, they push back against the SEC. And so here's a quote from the SEC, which in my book was actually good. They wrote, The SEC states it, quote, does not seek appellate review of any holding relating to the fact that the underlying assets here are nothing but computer code with no inherent value, end quote. Okay, and so that's the quote for us, that where the SEC told us, yeah, we're actually not going to appeal anything having to do with whether or not XRP itself is a security. So that was a huge win. That was the biggest legal news having to do with XRP since the July 13th ruling came down from Judge Torres, right? That was gigantic. The SEC threw in the towel. They quit. But they did also write here, it's just computer code with no inherent value. Now, Ripple pushed back against that, and they said, actually, the judge found that there is inherent value. And so here's the thing. I take issue with Ripple's perspective, and I'll say they're wrong if the word inherent is synonymous with intrinsic, and I think it is. And I'll get into that a little bit further in just a second here. And you'll see why. I have a very thorough breakdown of what I'm thinking here, and it's, again, you'll see by the end of this video, if you stick with this is way more in depth than people give it credit for, and you'll see why by the time we get to the end of this video. But I would take issue with Ripple's perspective, and if it's true that the judge's perspective is that there's intrinsic value, then I would disagree. If they're saying inherent and they mean something different by inherent, then they'd have to let me know. But I looked up the definition of inherent and intrinsic, multiple dictionaries, and it seems like they're synonymous. So I would just take issue with that, and you'll see why in a second here. There's also an XRP community member named Zuver, at Dan Zuver. He responded to my poll, and he wrote, nothing has intrinsic value. And again, that's something where you might just be like, what are you talking about? How could something not have intrinsic value? Well, I just encourage you to stick with me, because that guy's correct. He actually nailed it. Now, I don't know what his rationale for that is. He hasn't stated it publicly that I've seen, but he is absolutely correct. Nothing has intrinsic value. And here I wanted to share with you a perspective from Panos, because he shared this also. He responded to my poll, and he shared a couple tweets that he had posted from April of this year, and he does think that XRP has, in crypto, he actually wrote cryptocurrencies in general, but of course that would apply to XRP. So he does think that cryptocurrencies have intrinsic value. And I do want to say here, Panos is one of the greatest thinkers in the XRP community. I very firmly believe that. I'm a gigantic fan. He puts out incredible, thoughtful content without the hype. He just lets the excitement surrounding XRP and crypto just speak for itself. I very much appreciate that here. And so I'm going to push back against his idea here, but this is not a challenge to him on any sort of personal level. In fact, I appreciate the thoughtfulness from him. And if he ever listens to this, if he can find a hole in my logic and he can prove me wrong, that's fine. I won't be offended by that either. I'm just trying to operate in good faith, because I think that's what we should do as a community. Just get as close to truth as possible by challenging one another's ideas. And so here's what Panos said. Contrary to the belief of most people that a cryptocurrency is not backed by anything, it does have intrinsic value, and it is backed by its utility and unique blockchain properties and features such as security, decentralization, immutability, scarcity, and known monetary policy. On the other hand, fiat currencies have none of that, are not backed by anything other than trust in the government and the central bank, that have no transparency, and we don't even know what they will do tomorrow that may devalue the currency. Or worse, the CBDCs censor you. And so a ton of people obviously like that. He got 116,000 views on that, 916 likes, 221 reposts. Tons of people are agreeing with that. So I admit, I'm in the minority. I got the uphill battle to fight here, and that's fine. I'm going to go for it, though. Let's make sure we're talking on the same page, because a lot of times when people debate or have arguments, they're using the same words, and they have different understandings and beliefs of what those words mean. So if we're going to do this properly, we need to make sure we're all on the same page and we understand what these words mean. So when we're talking about value, I've many times over the years stated that when I'm talking about value versus price as it pertains to cryptocurrency, well, price is just the spot market price of like a cryptocurrency. But if we're talking about utility, that's where the real value is. And I differentiate between value and price. And that's because when you're talking about price, there's a reason that I do this. When you're talking about price, that is not the same as utility, like value in terms of utility. You can't use price in place of that. But it is the case, you actually can use value, and I certainly see this point. I strive to use it differently, because you can't use price to mean value in terms of utility. But if you look at what value is, it actually can mean an open market price of anything. right? But it also could be, what it means in terms of utility. So here you can see this is just dictionary.com, and look, you can go to multiple websites. They're all more or less the same. I checked for everything I'm showing here, multiple sources here. Oxford, Merriam-Webster, dictionary.com, doesn't matter. It's all the same. So here you go. Here's two primary descriptions at the top that would be relevant to this discussion. Number one, so this is the first description of what the word value means. Relative worth, merit, or importance. And then they have examples of that. He knows the value of a college education. Here's another one. In chess, the queen has a high value. There you go. So they're talking about value, but not as it pertains to price. But it can pertain to price. And so that's the second part of the definition. Monetary or material worth, as in commerce or trade. So there you go. So if you talk about the spot market price of XRP, that would be the value of XRP as it pertains to that. So there's value in terms of utility. That's part of the definition. So you can use value in different ways. I just want to make sure we all understand that. You can accurately use value in terms of what the spot price is, although I try to use the word price so that it's easier to understand the difference between what I'm talking about. You can do that, though. I'm still, in future videos, I'm typically still going to try and differentiate those things because I think it makes things more clear. But I'm just saying, yes, you can use value to describe what price actually is. Or you can talk about utility, importance, merit, worth, all that stuff, which is separate, okay? So now we understand what that is. Okay, and then there's the word quality. It's an essential or distinctive characteristic, property, or attribute, right? And so basically, a huge part of my premise is XRP and the XRP ledger, although there is no intrinsic value there are intrinsic qualities. And it's the intrinsic qualities that people build on top of, which results in the opportunity for actual utility, and that utility is the value, right? And then once something has values, if people want to start trading it, then it would have a price, and that's a form of value. So okay, that's right. So that's what quality is. Then we have intrinsic. The definition here is belonging to a thing by its very nature. Okay, so what we're talking about here is by the very constitution of something existing, it is intrinsic. So like you, by the nature of you existing, if you're understanding the words coming out of my mouth, and you're a living creature, you're a human, right? Because I understand other things have ears, but if you're understanding what I'm saying right here, you're human because by the very nature of you existing in your DNA, by the constitution of you existing, you are a human. And so when we're talking about something that's intrinsic, it's by the very nature of it existing, right? Then there's the word subjectively. And this is described as, this is a definition, in a way that pertains to or is influenced by a person's feelings, moods, opinions, prejudices, etc. Okay, so in short, opinion. If something is opinion-based, that means that there is no perfect answer because people have different perspective on it. Does pizza taste good? Is blue a good-looking color? Is blue the best color? It can be anything. Is a monkey the best animal that it's so subjective. You could just name anything, right? It's opinion based, right? That's what subjectivity is. So when we're using the word subjectively, we are talking about an opinion. And so if there's no situation where something that's being discussed could be fact based, then it's subjective. And so if you look at the word objectively, the definition is in a way that is not influenced by personal feelings or prejudices. In a way that can, and here's the second part of it, in a way that can be known, measured, or proven. Okay, so what's an example of something that would be objectively true? 2 + 2 is 4. There you go. That can absolutely be true. So somebody could say 2 + 2 is 5, and they could even believe it. I bet you could probably find, and maybe there's like some sort of competency issue, but you could probably find out of 8 billion people, you could probably find one person on the planet that thinks 2 + 2 is 5 and they're wrong. So believing something that is wrong doesn't make it subjective. It means that you're just wrong. So there's an objective truth, and then you are just wrong about that. But if there's something where it can only be opinion based because it's not something that can be measured or proven, if it's opinion based, then it's subjective. So again, 2 + 2 is 5. If you believe that, you're just wrong. It's still an objective truth. 2 + 2 is obviously 4, right? Okay. So now let me jump into why I pretty strongly believe what I cited at the outset of the video, which is that XRP itself it just does not have intrinsic value. And so look, the reason there is such dispute over this topic is that people disagree on whether or not value is subjective or objective. They really do. And it seems to me that even the authors of the dictionaries must believe that value is always objective. But it's not always. So let me parse that out. If something has a market price, it is objectively true, if it has a market price, that it has value in terms of market price. However, that does not mean that it has intrinsic value in terms of market price. Because humans must assign a market price to a thing through supply and demand in markets, and there is nothing intrinsic about a value that only exists after humans engage in an activity. Sorry, excuse me, folks. I've been talking all day. Sorry, let me sip some water there. So anyway, so sorry about that. So anyway, what I was saying though is that there's nothing intrinsic about a value if that value only exists after humans engage in an activity. So when you're talking about, like spot market price of XRP, price of anything on an open market, that exists because of the humans, right? And so without humans, there is no market price for anything. So a market price clearly is not intrinsic. For example, like bananas are a commodity and they have a market price. If humans go extinct but bananas still exist, then bananas will no longer have value in terms of market price. If bananas no longer have value in terms of market price, then clearly that value was never intrinsic. Because if something is intrinsic, that means it's part of the very nature of its existence. If market price were part of the very nature of the existence of bananas, then they would have a market price regardless of whether or not humans exist. Which sounds silly, doesn't it? But what about the other meaning of the word value? The other meaning of the word value is, again, relative worth, merit, or importance. That's the other part of the definition. Utility of XRP would certainly fall under this part of the definition of value. XRP is subjectively valuable in terms of relative worth, merit, and importance. It is not objectively valuable in terms of relative, not objectively valuable in terms of relative, the definition, what was it? Worth, merit, and importance. It is not objectively valuable in those terms. And so, and this is because some people find XRP important and useful, and some people do not. You can make a claim that that people find XRP important and useful, and that statement would be objectively true, since at least some people do find XRP important and useful. But that objectively true statement about what some people feel about XRP is separate from the fact that XRP itself is only subjectively valuable, because not all people will find XRP important or useful, and not all people will agree that XRP is important and useful. So again, it's the same, like I was saying earlier, like, does pizza taste good? It's the same thing. It's subjective opinion. There's room for other people to argue against it. It's not a mathematical thing like 2 + 2 is 4. So you can see what I'm talking about, right? And so look, all of what I've just outlined here means that whether or not something has value in terms of market price is objective. But whether or not something has value in terms of the other part of the definition of the word value, which again means relative worth, merit, and importance, is subjective. Additionally, for the reasons I've just outlined, value is never intrinsic. Value is never intrinsic, no matter what part of the definition of value you're considering. And this is why the term intrinsic value is a non sequitur. Look, market value is derived from humans, so it's not intrinsic. And that's one of the types of value, the actual price of something. So let me say it again. Market value is derived from humans, so it's not intrinsic. Value in terms of the importance of something is subjective. So this is the other part of the definition. In terms of whether or not something's important, value in terms of importance of something is subjective, which means the importance is, importance is opinion-based. Sorry about that, folks. Let me just take another sip of water. Too much talking for me. So anyway, what I was saying though is value, as it pertains to like the importance of something, that is subjective, which means the importance is opinion based, and importance, which is opinion based, is not intrinsic. So that's the other type. So now I've talked about the price of something. You're talking about the price of something, or you're talking about the importance or utility of something. I've covered both now, right? It's never intrinsic. Not that there isn't value, it's that it's not intrinsic. So now apply all of these understandings to XRP. XRP is simply computer code. It did not have a market price until humans assigned it one through open market trade. So supply and demand. So clearly, value in terms of market price is not intrinsic. Also, XRP has no importance or utility if people don't use it or believe that it does. So clearly, that aspect of value is also not intrinsic. Look, the term intrinsic value, like in and of itself, simply makes no sense. And people should stop using it, okay? It's as nonsensical as saying something is a round square or a tall short. It doesn't make sense. It's incoherent. And, again, I had never until recently taken the time to think through it in such terms, because I was more interested in, is there actual value? But this argument's been going on and on and on, and I was like, finally, it's like, okay, I want to get to the bottom of this. I want to find out what I think makes sense. So I had to think. And it's so complex, and I did my best to like condense it down as much as possible. But it's actually, as you can see, after going through it the way I did, you can see why I said what I said at the outset, right? This is much more complex than I think people give it credit for. It's much more complex than I would have thought, because there's so many thought branches that start when you say one thing. Think how many thought branches you can break off on. And so I was going through that. And so I really did probably spend, it must have been over 5 hours over a span of several days or so thinking through this. Because it's fascinating, and it's also interesting to me. Like I enjoy these fun, like sort of critical thinking thought exercise things. And so it was actually a lot more interesting than I thought. And so again, that's why I keep thinking, like, if you're saying something has intrinsic value, do you believe that there's also a round square? Because the term doesn't make sense. Like, and if I'm wrong, tell me where I'm wrong, because I know that most people think there's intrinsic value, but I also think that I speculate that the reason most people think that XRP has intrinsic value in our community is because they probably haven't broken it down quite like this. Just like I hadn't until very recently, and I've been in XRP for almost 6 years, and I hadn't done it, right? But I think that frequently, again, when it's as simple as this, when people have disagreements about stuff like this, it's because they have different understandings of what words mean. But that's why I wanted to go to the definition. If you understand what value is, and quality, and intrinsic, and subjectively, and objectively, if you know what all those words mean, and we can all agree on those terms, then go to the underlying ideas that I just shared. Are the underlying ideas that I just shared, are they true or not? Am I mistaken in any of my underlying ideas? And so as long as we're applying the definition of the words properly, and I believe that I certainly am here, then clearly, it's very clear to me, XRP has no intrinsic value, but it's highly valuable. The market cap, whatever it is today, tens of billions of dollars, so it's got that in terms of value. And then it's also got value in terms of utility. It's if not the most, it's one of the most useful cryptocurrencies out there, with the most value. It is, but it's not intrinsic. It exists because of people. So XRP, again, has intrinsic qualities, but not intrinsic value. It's only valuable if we use it. And again, if you don't think that's the case, then just look at the definition of the word value. Here, I'll pop it up again on the screen. Like, again, because the definition is relative worth, merit, or importance. And the other part of it is monetary or material worth, as in commerce or trade. So, is what it is. If I actually, after all this time, and it's possible, I admit there could be a hole in my logic even after 5 hours. Like, sometimes when you think that deeply, you can still be missing something, and sometimes it's even obvious. If I have missed something, please just point it out, lay out your case, and I'll be happy to credit you in a future video, because I acknowledge I could be wrong, and I won't be ashamed. Like, I'm not going to be embarrassed, because I'm proud of taking the time to think through this and share my thoughts, because it took a lot of effort to do this, actually. And so I'm proud that I did that, even if I'm wrong, because I'm working with the rest of the community towards the end goal of seeking whatever is true. And that should always be applauded in my book. That's why, like, you don't have to be afraid to be wrong in life. It's okay. It only sucks if people are jerks about it. If people are rude about it, then it's not fun, because if somebody's being a jerk, and then, like, who wants to admit that they're wrong when somebody's being rude? Now I still would, but I'd also not like that person anymore. I'm like, wow, that person's kind of a jackass, right? So everybody's, it's fine. But hopefully you found what I said to be persuasive. Hopefully you didn't find any holes, because I prefer to be right, but I'm okay with being wrong. But I do hope that this was persuasive. And even if you think that I'm wrong, or you're sure that I'm wrong, that's fine too. But I would like to know what you know, because if I'm wrong, actually, I want to stop being wrong. So I would appreciate it, actually, if you tell me where my logic just went off the rails. And if it did, fine. I have failures in logic just like any other human sometimes. But I just think this is something that almost nobody has delved in ever to this degree. Like, who does this, right? So this is a little bit of a different video, but I love stuff like this. To me, this is really enjoyable and interesting, and hopefully a lot of you found it the same. But I guess I'll stop yammering on. That is what it is. XRP has no intrinsic value, even though it is among the most valuable cryptocurrencies in existence. So that's my stance. I'm not a financial advisor. You should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. That would be a very, very, very bad idea. Until next time, to the moon, Lambo.